They say death came into the world through sin, through disobedience, through the eating of forbidden fruit. They are wrong. Death came into the world through something far more ancient, far more human, far more terrible. It came through jealousy, through the hatred of a brother for a brother, through the moment when Set, god of chaos and storms, looked upon his older sibling Osiris and decided that the world was not large enough for both of them. This is not a story from Greece or Rome. This is older. This comes from the black soil of Egypt, from the banks of a river that flooded with the regularity of a heartbeat, from a civilization that understood something the rest of the world would take millennia to learn, that death is not the end, but merely a door. And Osiris was the first to walk through it. But what the ancient Egyptians knew, what they carved into their tomb walls and whispered in their temples, was a truth so devastating that it echoes through every murder, every betrayal, every act of violence committed in the name of envy. The first king to die did not fall to an enemy. He fell to family. And the hand that killed him smiled as it struck. In the time before mortal memory, when the gods still walked the earth and the boundary between heaven and the world of men was thin as morning mist, there ruled a king unlike any who had come before. His name was Osiris, firstborn son of Geb the earth and Nut the sky, and he was beautiful in a way that transcended the physical. His skin was said to shimmer with the green of new growth, the color of the Nile's fertile banks after the annual flood receded. His eyes held the depth of the river itself, dark and knowing and impossibly ancient. When he spoke, his voice carried the rhythm of water over stones, and when he walked among his people, crops seemed to lean toward him like flowers following the sun. He had taught humanity the secrets of agriculture, showing them how to plant wheat and barley, how to coax sustenance from the reluctant earth. He had given them laws and justice, replacing the chaos of tribal warfare with order and civilization. He had shown them how to worship the gods properly, how to build temples that would stand for eternity, how to live in harmony with the cosmic order the Egyptians called Ma'at. Under his rule, Egypt flourished. The granaries overflowed. Children laughed in the streets. And Osiris, beloved of all who knew him, sat upon his throne with his sister wife Isis at his side, and the world seemed perfect. But perfection is a poison to those who feel excluded from it. And there was one who watched Osiris's glory with eyes that burned like desert storms. Set was the second son, born moments after Osiris but separated from him by an eternity of resentment. Where Osiris was green and growing, Set was red, the red of the desert sands, the red of blood, the red of the sun as it died each evening in the western sky. He was not evil, not in his beginning. He was chaos, which is different. He was the storm that broke the drought, the violence that sometimes preceded necessary change, the destruction that cleared the way for new creation. The Egyptians did not hate Set. They feared him, respected him, made offerings to appease his volatile nature. But they did not love him, not the way they loved Osiris. And Set felt this difference like a wound that never healed. He watched his brother receive adoration while he received only fearful glances. He watched Osiris marry the beautiful Isis while he was given Nephthys, the shadow sister, the lesser goddess. He watched the people of Egypt speak of Osiris as the perfect king, the living embodiment of Ma'at, while they spoke of Set in whispers, as something to be endured rather than celebrated. Year after year, the wound deepened. Century after century, the resentment festered. And slowly, imperceptibly, the chaos god began to plan. What most people misunderstand about Set's crime is that it was not impulsive. It was not a moment of rage or a flash of murderous heat. It was calculated. It was patient. It was the work of a brilliant mind turned entirely toward destruction. Set spent years preparing his brother's death, studying Osiris's habits, noting his weaknesses, gathering allies among gods and spirits who chafed under the perfect king's perfect rule. He commissioned craftsmen to build a chest of extraordinary beauty, cedar wood inlaid with gold and precious stones, carved with images of the afterlife that seemed almost prophetic. But this was no ordinary chest. Its dimensions were precise, exact, measured to fit one body and one body alone. And when Set unveiled his masterpiece at a great feast in honor of his brother, no one suspected the horror that was about to unfold. The banquet hall blazed with torchlight and rang with laughter. The greatest gods of Egypt had gathered to celebrate Osiris's return from a journey to distant lands, where he had been spreading the gifts of civilization to foreign peoples. Wine flowed like the Nile itself. Music filled the air with sounds that seemed to come from heaven. And Set, playing the role of the loving brother with a skill that would have terrified anyone who knew his true heart, brought forth the magnificent chest as a gift. "A game," he announced, his voice carrying through the hall with theatrical warmth. "Whoever fits most perfectly within this chest shall have it as their own." One by one, the gods tried. Some were too tall, others too broad. The chest seemed made for no one present. And then, with a smile that did not reach his eyes, Set turned to Osiris. "Brother, will you not try? Surely the perfect king deserves the perfect prize." Osiris, trusting and unsuspecting, stepped into the chest. He lay down, and he fit. Perfectly, exactly. As if the chest had been waiting for him all along. The lid slammed shut. The sound echoed through the hall like thunder, and in that echo, everything changed. Set's conspirators moved with rehearsed precision, sealing the chest with molten lead even as Osiris's muffled cries emerged from within. The other gods, stunned by the sudden violence, found themselves surrounded by Set's followers, unable to intervene. Isis screamed her husband's name, but strong hands held her back. And Set, standing over the sealed coffin with a smile that was finally, horribly genuine, did not gloat or explain. He simply ordered his servants to carry the chest to the Nile. They threw it into the dark waters. And the river, that life-giving artery of Egypt, became a grave. Inside the chest, Osiris drowned. The god of life, the king of kings, the teacher of humanity, he died in darkness, betrayed by his own blood, gasping for air that would never come. And Set, watching the chest disappear into the current, felt something he had not experienced in eons: satisfaction. But this was only the beginning of the nightmare. Isis refused to accept her husband's death. Where others saw tragedy, she saw only a problem to be solved. Where others wept and mourned, she dried her tears and began to search. She was not merely Osiris's wife, she was the goddess of magic, of wisdom, of fierce and desperate love. And she would tear the world apart to find him. She wandered the length of Egypt, asking everyone she met if they had seen the beautiful chest. She followed the Nile to its mouth and beyond, crossing into foreign lands where no Egyptian goddess had ever ventured. She disguised herself as a beggar, as a servant, as a mourning widow, which, in truth, she was. Months passed, then years. The trail grew cold. Hope began to waver even in her immortal heart. And then, in the distant land of Byblos, in a kingdom ruled by mortals who knew nothing of Egyptian gods, she heard a rumor that changed everything. A miraculous tree had grown on the shore, a tree of impossible beauty and fragrance. The king of Byblos had been so enchanted by it that he had cut it down and used its trunk as a pillar in his palace. What no one knew, what only Isis could sense with her divine perception, was what the tree had grown around. The chest. Osiris's coffin had washed ashore, and a tamarisk tree had embraced it, growing around it, incorporating it into its very being. Isis infiltrated the palace of Byblos with the patience of a god who has eternity to wait. She became a nursemaid to the king's infant son, using her magic to make herself indispensable. Night after night, she would hold the child over flames, burning away his mortality, preparing to gift him with eternal life in exchange for what she truly wanted. But the queen discovered her one night, saw her son seemingly burning, and screamed with the terror of any mother. The spell was broken. The child would remain mortal, and Isis, her disguise no longer necessary, revealed herself in her true divine form. The mortals fell to their knees, and Isis asked for only one thing: the pillar. They gave it to her without question. She cut it open with her own hands, and there, within the wood, was the chest. Within the chest was Osiris, dead, cold, but preserved somehow as if waiting for her. She fell upon his body and wept, and her tears were said to cause the Nile to flood for the first time, bringing life to the land even as she mourned death. She brought the chest back to Egypt, hiding it in the marshes of the delta while she prepared the rituals that might restore her husband to life. She was so close, so impossibly close to undoing her brother's crime, but Seth had spies everywhere. And when he learned that Osiris's body had been recovered, that Isis was working magic that might reverse even death itself, his rage knew no bounds. He found the hiding place. He opened the chest, and what he did next ensured that Osiris could never be fully restored. He tore his brother's body into pieces. Some accounts say 14 pieces, one for each night of the waning moon. Others say 42, one for each nome of Egypt. He scattered these fragments across the length and breadth of the land, throwing them into the Nile, burying them in the desert, casting them to the winds. Let her search now, he thought. Let her try to gather what cannot be gathered. Let her understand that some things, once broken, can never be made whole. He underestimated her. Isis began her search again, but this time she was not alone. Her sister Nephthys, Set's own wife, had never loved her husband. She joined Isis in the quest, using her own divine powers to sense the scattered remains. Together, the two goddesses combed every inch of Egypt. They dredged rivers and dug in deserts. They followed whispers and visions and the faintest traces of divine essence. Piece by piece, fragment by fragment, they recovered what Set had destroyed. 13 pieces they found, but one, the most intimate, the most vital, was lost forever. A fish had swallowed it, and the Nile kept its secret. Isis fashioned a replacement from gold and magic, and then she began the ritual that would change the nature of existence itself. She wrapped the reassembled body in linen, creating the first mummy. She spoke words of power that had never been spoken before, words that reached beyond death into whatever lay past it. And in the flickering lamplight of a hidden chamber, with Nephthys chanting beside her, and all the magic of heaven and earth flowing through her hands, she called her husband back. Osiris opened his eyes, but he was not alive, not in the way he had been before. He existed in a space between, a threshold state that was neither death nor life, but something else entirely. His skin was no longer green with growth, but pale, the color of the moon, the color of things that had passed beyond the sun's reach. He could not remain in the world of the living. That door had closed forever. But he could exist, he could rule. And Isis, in that brief window when her magic held death at bay, lay with her husband one final time. Their union produced a child, Horus, the falcon god, who would be born to avenge his father and reclaim the throne that Set had stolen. And Osiris, his purpose in the living world complete, descended into the Duat, the Egyptian underworld, where he would sit in judgment of every soul that death delivered to his realm. Here is what the ancient Egyptians understood that we have largely forgotten. Osiris did not become Lord of the Dead as a punishment. He became Lord of the Dead because someone had to. And who better than one who had experienced death himself? Who better to judge the hearts of the deceased than one who knew the terror of the sealed chest, the agony of betrayal, the cold embrace of the Nile's waters? When Egyptian souls faced the final judgment, they stood before Osiris on his throne in the Hall of Two Truths. Their hearts were weighed against the feather of Maat, that same cosmic order Osiris had embodied in life. If the heart was light, if the soul had lived justly, Osiris welcomed them into the field of reeds, a paradise that mirrored the best of earthly Egypt. If the heart was heavy with sin, the monster Ammit devoured it, and the soul ceased to exist entirely. This was not cruelty. This was justice administered by one who understood both sides of death's door. Osiris became, in his eternal role, the promise that death was not the end, that there was something after, that the good would be rewarded and the wicked would face consequences. His murder, his dismemberment, his resurrection, these became the template for every Egyptian's hope of eternal life. When they mummified their dead, they were imitating what Isis had done for Osiris. When they spoke the spells of the Book of the Dead, they were invoking his story. Every tomb in Egypt was, in some sense, a reenactment of Osiris's journey from death to immortality. But what of Set? What of the brother whose jealousy had set all this in motion? His story did not end with his crime. The Egyptians were too sophisticated for simple narratives of good and evil. Set remained a god. He was still chaos, still necessary in his terrible way. When the sun god Ra traveled through the underworld each night, it was Set who stood at the prow of his boat, fighting the serpent Apophis, defending creation against the forces of uncreation. The murderer of Osiris became, paradoxically, a protector of the cosmic order. This was not forgiveness. This was the Egyptian recognition that even destructive forces have their place, that the universe requires both order and chaos, both creation and destruction, both Osiris and Set. They were brothers not just in blood, but in function, two halves of an eternal dance that kept the world turning. Some modern scholars have suggested that their conflict represented the struggle between the fertile Nile Valley and the encroaching desert, between civilization and the wilderness that always threatened to reclaim it. Others see political history encoded in myth, memories of ancient conflicts between different regions of Egypt projected onto divine figures. Perhaps both interpretations are true. Perhaps neither fully captures what the Egyptians themselves believed when they told this story, around fires that burned 3,000 years before Christ. And Horus, the son born of death, conceived in the brief window between Osiris's resurrection and his descent to the underworld. He grew in hiding, protected by his mother's magic, trained for the confrontation that destiny demanded. When he came of age, he challenged Set for the throne of Egypt. Their conflict lasted 80 years, a cosmic struggle that involved trials and battles and transformations that strained the boundaries of human imagination. Horus lost an eye. Set lost something more intimate. The gods themselves were divided, some supporting the rightful heir, others backing the uncle who had ruled for so long. In the end, after intervention by the highest gods, Horus was declared the rightful king. Set was not destroyed. He could not be destroyed, being essential to creation, but he was diminished, pushed to the margins, condemned to eternal struggle without victory. And every pharaoh who ever sat on Egypt's throne was considered a living Horus, a god-king whose right to rule descended directly from that long-ago conflict, from the son who avenged the father Set had murdered. The story of Osiris is, at its heart, a story about what endures. Bodies can be destroyed, they can be drowned, dismembered, scattered across a kingdom. But love endures. Isis's search for her husband, her refusal to accept the finality of his death, her magic that transcended even mortality. This is the emotional core of the myth. Justice endures. Horus's victory, achieved across decades of struggle, proved that crimes will eventually face reckoning, even crimes committed by gods, and meaning endures. Osiris's death was senseless, a brother's jealousy manifesting in violence, but his resurrection gave that death significance. He became more than a murdered king. He became the Lord of eternity, the promise of life after death, the green god of cycles who dies and rises with the agricultural year, with the flooding of the Nile, with the perpetual rhythms of existence itself. But perhaps the deepest truth in this myth is one the Egyptians never explicitly stated, though they must have felt it every time they told the story. It is this: the ones who love us will search for us even in death. They will gather our scattered pieces. They will wrap us in linen and speak words of power over our cold bodies. And through their love, through their refusal to let us simply vanish, we will persist. Not in the same form, not in the same world, but we will persist. Every funeral is an echo of Isis kneeling over Osiris. Every act of mourning is a search through the marshes of the Delta. Every memory kept alive by those who loved the deceased is a piece of the body recovered, assembled, made whole again through the magic of remembrance. The Egyptians built their entire civilization around this insight. Their pyramids and tombs, their mummies and death texts, their elaborate preparations for the afterlife. All of it stemmed from the story of a god who was murdered by his brother and brought back by his wife. When you stand before the golden mask of Tutankhamun, when you gaze upon the hieroglyphs that cover the walls of ancient tombs, when you see the images of Osiris sitting in judgment with his green skin and his crook and flail, remember what you are seeing. You are seeing the legacy of the first death. You are seeing humanity's oldest meditation on what it means to lose someone, to refuse that loss, to fight against a finality that seems so absolute. The Nile still floods, though dams have tamed it. The desert still presses against the edges of cultivation, though cities have pushed it back. And somewhere, in whatever realm the ancient gods inhabit, Osiris still sits upon his throne, weighing hearts, granting paradise to the just, offering what every human being has ever wanted in the face of mortality. Hope. The hope that death is not the end, that love is stronger than the grave, that even a body torn into 14 pieces can be made whole again if someone loves it enough to search. Set still exists too in his way. Every time jealousy poisons a heart, every time a brother raises his hand against a brother, every time chaos tears down what order has built, that is Set. He cannot be destroyed because he is part of us, part of the universe, part of the terrible truth that creation and destruction are forever intertwined. The Egyptians did not pretend otherwise. They honored Set even as they condemned his crime. They understood that to be human is to contain both brothers within us, the green god of life and the red god of chaos, forever struggling for dominance. The question is not whether we will face that struggle. The question is which brother will win. And so the story ends where all Egyptian stories end, not with death, but with what comes after. Osiris in his hall of judgment, Isis in her temples, worshipped for millennia as the goddess of magic and devotion. Horus on his throne, the model for every pharaoh who would ever rule. Set in his exile, necessary and terrible and eternal. The Nile flowing as it has always flowed, bringing life to the desert, carrying the memory of a god who drowned in its waters and rose again to rule the dead. 4,000 years ago, Egyptian children heard this story and understood that death was not something to fear, but a journey to be prepared for. Tonight, you have heard it too. And perhaps when your time comes to stand before the scales, when your heart is weighed against the feather of truth, you will remember the God who went before you, the king who was murdered, the husband who was mourned, the father who was avenged, the Lord of eternity who proved once and for all that death is not an ending. It is merely another throne.